They called him the most feared man in football, not just because he could sack a quarterback before the play even developed, but because when Lawrence Taylor stepped onto the field, everything changed. Opponents didn't just plan for him, they lost sleep over him. Coaches rewrote playbooks. Quarterbacks quickened their release. Offensive lines shifted like panicked chess pieces, all trying to survive the storm that was LT. His style wasn't just dominant, it was disruptive. The kind of chaos that rewired how the game was played. But before the roars of sold-out stadiums, before the headlines and highlight reels, LT was just a kid from Williamsburg, Virginia. He grew up in a modest home, one of 3 boys in a working-class family. Williamsburg wasn't a place where NFL dreams were common currency, but it was where his competitiveness was forged. Whether it was racing neighborhood kids or playing pickup games, Lawrence played to win and to dominate. He wasn't the biggest, the fastest, or the most polished in his youth. But he had something far more dangerous, a fearless streak that made him impossible to intimidate. Football didn't define LT right away. In fact, he was a late bloomer to the sport. More interested in basketball and baseball at first. But once he discovered the game, it was as if he'd found his true calling. That fearlessness from childhood translated into a style that was all aggression, all instinct, and completely unapologetic. He didn't just tackle, he exploded through opponents, making the collision feel like an inevitability rather than a contest. Those who knew him back then recall that even in high school, Lawrence never played to just stop someone. He played to end the play before it ever had a chance to exist. By the time he finished at Lafayette High School, it was clear to anyone watching that this kid from Williamsburg wasn't just another athlete. He was a game changer in the making. College recruiters began to take notice, sensing that with the right coaching, he could be a once-in-a-generation defensive force. And so, with a mix of raw talent, small-town grit, and a relentless hunger to prove himself, Lawrence Taylor set his sights on the next chapter, one that would take him to the University of North Carolina and put him on the fast track to football history. Next came the transformation, where an unpolished high school star would evolve into the most dominant linebacker college football had ever seen. When Lawrence Taylor first arrived at the University of North Carolina, no one, least of all LT himself, imagined he'd become one of the most feared defensive players in football history. He wasn't even recruited as a linebacker. In fact, he started out as a defensive lineman, raw in technique and unsure of his role. Coaches saw flashes of something special, but it wasn't until a position change that everything began to click. The move to linebacker wasn't just a tweak. It was the spark that lit the fuse. Suddenly, Taylor's speed, instincts, and violent burst had room to breathe. And once they did, there was no putting them back in the cage. The transition wasn't smooth at first. LT was still learning how to read offenses, to anticipate plays before they happened. But what he lacked in polished skill he made up for with pure chaos. His tackles weren't textbook. They were overwhelming. Offensive lines had no idea where he'd come from, only that he was there in an instant, tearing through blocks like they were paper. The more he played, the more his confidence grew, and the more the Tar Heels defense began to revolve around him. By his junior year, Lawrence Taylor wasn't just part of the defense. He was the defense. Then came 1980, the year everything changed. LT recorded 16 sacks, terrorized quarterbacks across the ACC, and earned unanimous All-American honors. He was no longer a promising athlete. He was a phenomenon. Every opponent circled his name on the scouting report, yet no one had an answer for him. College football had seen great linebackers before, but not like this. Taylor's game was an unpredictable storm. Fast, physical, and merciless. He didn't just want to stop plays. He wanted to destroy them. By the time his college career ended, LT had redefined what a linebacker could be. His blend of speed, aggression, and instinct wasn't supposed to exist in one player, and NFL scouts knew it. They weren't just watching a standout from UNC. They were watching the birth of a generational talent. And as draft day loomed, one thing was certain. Lawrence Taylor was about to take the chaos he'd unleashed in Chapel Hill and bring it to the biggest stage in football. In 1981, the NFL was about to feel a jolt. It didn't see coming. Draft day was buzzing, but when the New York Giants used the second overall pick on Lawrence Taylor, the reactions were split. Some saw a once-in-a-generation defensive talent. Others questioned whether his aggressive, unpredictable style could work in the pros. The Giants weren't just drafting a linebacker. They were gambling on a player whose game blurred the line between reckless and revolutionary. What they got was more than they ever imagined. From the moment LT stepped onto an NFL field, the league's rhythm changed. Training camp turned into a showcase of speed and violence. He wasn't content to simply fit into the Giants' defense. He rewrote its identity. Offensive coordinators watched film in disbelief. Linemen couldn't keep up. Quarterbacks felt the pressure before the ball was even snapped. Taylor didn't just play linebacker. He attacked every play like it was a personal insult. His combination of speed, strength, and pure disruption made him an unstoppable force from day one. That rookie season wasn't just good, it was historic. LT didn't ease into the league. He detonated in it. By the end of the year, he had claimed both Defensive Rookie of the Year and Defensive Player of the Year honors, an achievement no one had accomplished before. It wasn't hype anymore. Lawrence Taylor was the player every offense feared, the one who could take over a game from the defensive side of the ball, something rarely seen before. By the close of his first year, the skepticism was gone, replaced by a new reality. The Giants had just drafted the most disruptive defensive player in football. And as the 1980s unfolded, the rest of the NFL would learn that LT wasn't just a great rookie. He was about to become the standard by which all defenders would be measured. What came next wasn't just dominance. It was a defensive revolution. They called him the Predator. And in the 1980s, that title wasn't an exaggeration. It was a warning. Lawrence Taylor didn't just play outside linebacker. He reinvented what the position could be. Before LT, linebackers were expected to read plays, cover their zones, and tackle. But Taylor had no interest in just reacting. He was there to hunt. His role became an attack position, a relentless pass-rushing nightmare that forced offenses to rethink their entire game plan. Every snap felt like a countdown to impact. Taylor's speed off the edge was otherworldly. He could explode past offensive tackles before they even finished their first step. And once he got close, the play was over. Quarterbacks didn't just lose yards, they lost confidence. His blend of raw power and precise angles meant that blocking him wasn't a matter of strength. It was survival. Coaches began designing entire schemes just to slow him down. Double teams, chip blocks, quick passes. But it rarely worked. Even on the plays where he didn't get the sack, his presence alone was enough to disrupt everything. The intimidation factor was real. Opposing quarterbacks admitted they would change plays at the line just to get the ball out faster when LT was lurking on the edge. Offensive coordinators lost sleep trying to find a weakness in his game, only to discover there wasn't one. Bill Parcells once said, "You don't try to coach him like other players, you just turn him loose and let him destroy." And that's exactly what he did, year after year. By the mid-80s, Lawrence Taylor wasn't just the best defender in the NFL. He was changing the DNA of the sport. Teams started drafting players and building offenses, specifically with the goal of surviving against him. But as the league adapted, so did LT. always finding new ways to attack. His reign as the game's ultimate predator had only just begun, setting the stage for an era where defenses could win championships on the back of one man's will. In the late 80s and early 90s, the New York Giants weren't just contenders, they were feared. And at the center of it all stood Lawrence Taylor, the beating heart of a defense that could crush dreams in 60 minutes flat. LT wasn't just another star in the lineup. He was the reason teams dreaded seeing Giants on the schedule. His presence turned regular games into survival tests. And when the biggest stages arrived, he thrived under the brightest lights. Super Bowl 21 in 1987 was LT's first shot at football immortality. Facing the Denver Broncos, Taylor's relentless pressure kept John Elway off balance all night, paving the way for a dominant Giants victory. It wasn't just the sacks or the tackles, it was the way he dictated every snap. 2 years later, the Giants were back in the hunt, but it was Super Bowl 45 in 1991 that cemented LT's legend. In a defensive masterclass against the high-powered Buffalo Bills, Taylor led a unit that held the NFL's most explosive offense to just 19 points. That one-point win, decided by a missed last-second field goal, was a testament to grit, discipline, and LT's leadership. It wasn't always about the highlight reel plays. Often, LT's biggest contributions came in the form of unseen pressure, forcing mistakes before they could develop. He was the quarterback of the defense, calling adjustments, reading offenses like a book, and inspiring his teammates to rise to his level. His intensity was contagious. You either matched it or got left behind. And when it mattered most, in the closing minutes of big games, he always found a way to be in the right place, making the play that sealed the win. By the time the confetti fell on his second Super Bowl championship, Lawrence Taylor wasn't just the face of the Giants. He was the face of defensive football. His dominance had redefined what it meant to be an NFL game changer, and his legacy was now etched into the very fabric of the sport. But even as he stood on top of the football world, the battles he faced off the field were about to test him in ways the gridiron never could. For every roar of the crowd, Lawrence Taylor heard on Sundays there was a silence that followed when the lights went out, a silence he often filled with chaos. Behind the helmet and the Hall of Fame talent was a man wrestling with demons far more relentless than any offensive line. Addiction crept into his life during the height of his career, a dangerous escape from the constant pressure and expectation. And as the wins piled up, so did the late nights, risky choices, and headlines that had nothing to do with football. The media pounced on every misstep. Mugshots, scandal, and controversy became front-page news, overshadowing his accomplishments on the field. LT's life was suddenly an open book, dissected and judged by millions who only knew the legend, not the man. Fame had given him everything: money, recognition, power, but it also magnified every flaw, every mistake. For the first time, it seemed his ferocity couldn't bulldoze through the obstacles in front of him. The same intensity that made him unstoppable on the field often fueled the recklessness that followed him off it. His struggles weren't just tabloid fodder. They threatened to end his career entirely. Missed practices, league suspensions, and run-ins with the law pushed him to the brink. Coaches and teammates who once feared nothing with LT on their side began to question if they could rely on him at all. Still, there were flashes of the old dominance, moments when he'd step onto the field and remind the world why he was the most feared man in football. But those moments were fewer, and the battle to stay on track was becoming harder with every season. For Lawrence Taylor, survival off the field became just as important as performance on it. Every game was a test, not only of skill, but of willpower, to hold it together long enough to keep doing what he was born to do. And while the headlines painted a man spiraling out of control, inside, LT was fighting to find balance between the legend and the human being. That fight would shape the next chapter of his life, and the question was no longer whether he could dominate the game. It was whether he could save himself long enough to walk away on his own terms. By the time the final chapters of Lawrence Taylor's career began to take shape, the battles he fought off the field were just as defining as the ones he'd won on it. But LT was never one to back down from a challenge. Even after suspensions, injuries, and public scrutiny, he still found ways to roar back. There were games late in his career when the old magic returned, explosive bursts off the edge, bone-jarring sacks, and a fire in his eyes that reminded everyone why he was a generational force. These moments weren't just about numbers on a stat sheet. They were proof that the warrior inside him still lived. With experience came perspective. LT began stepping into a new role, not just as a player, but as a mentor. Younger teammates and rising stars sought his advice. And while his lessons sometimes came wrapped in blunt honesty, they were always rooted in the reality of a man who had lived both the glory and the grind. He spoke about the dangers of fame, the cost of bad choices, and the importance of discipline. Messages that carried weight because they came from someone who had been to the top, fallen hard, and fought his way back. As the game inevitably slowed for him, LT faced the moment every athlete dreads: letting go. Retirement wasn't easy, but there was a growing sense of acceptance. He could look back and see the full picture. Not just the sacks and trophies, but the mistakes, the lessons, and the survival. His legacy wasn't perfect, but it was undeniably powerful. Lawrence Taylor had changed football forever, and in his later years, he began to understand that the true measure of a legend isn't in the absence of flaws, it's in how they rise above them. The final whistle on his playing days was coming, but LT's story was far from over. What came next would be about life beyond the gridiron and the lasting shadow of a man who left his mark on every inch of it. Lawrence Taylor didn't just play football, he rewrote its rule book. Before LT, outside linebackers were pieces of the puzzle. After LT, they became the engines that could dismantle an entire offense. His rare blend of speed, power, and ferocity forced coaches to rethink everything, from blocking schemes to quarterback protection. Offensive lines had to be rebuilt, game plans redesigned, and whole positions redefined. Because one man could tilt the field that much. That's the LT effect. Football as we know it today exists in large part because of him. Generations of players studied his tape like gospel. Pass rushers, from Derek Thomas to Von Miller, point to LT as the blueprint, the model for relentless pursuit and fearless disruption. Even linebackers who never met him learned from him. His style became the standard for what greatness at the position looks like. He wasn't just a defensive weapon, he was a mindset. Ruthless, unpredictable, unstoppable. Those who stood alongside him speak with awe. Teammates recall the way his presence lifted the entire defense, while opponents admit they sometimes lost sleep the night before facing him. And LT himself, looking back, knows the price of that kind of greatness. It wasn't just physical, it demanded everything: body, mind, and spirit. He gave it all, sometimes too much, but in return, he earned immortality in the sport. In the end, Lawrence Taylor's name isn't just in the record books, it's in the DNA of the game. And that, perhaps, is the most enduring victory of all.